Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching NewsX World. We have just finished off that press conference from the Ministry of External Affairs, and we are joined by Megha Sharma, Senior Executive Editor for NewsX World, to discuss this further, who is in Delhi, who has attended the press conference. Megha, they took no questions, but what can you tell us about the information that we were given during this press conference?
Yes, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Defence have come out fourth day in a row holding that press conference, and it has been made amply clear as per the statements of the Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri that there has been once again an escalatory and provocative mode that Pakistan is in. There have been fresh attacks that have been made by Pakistan, and India has only responded. He has underlined that fact, reiterating it that India is only responding to these provocative and escalatory attacks in a responsible and measured fashion. Those were his exact words. He said that this has been a repeat of the escalatory and provocatory pattern of Pakistan in the wee hours of morning at 1:40 a.m. is when those missile strikes and drone strikes hit several parts of the border states of India, including Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, Rajasthan and Gujarat. Now, the Ministry of Defence spokesperson Wing Commander Vyomika Singh also went about informing the journalists, the media, that there have been drones and heavy caliber weapons that were used by Pakistan along the line of control, but also along the international border between India and Pakistan, not just striking military installations and ammunition depots, but also civilian infrastructure and residential areas. There have been more than 26 locations that have been struck once again and successfully by Pakistan. These range from Srinagar on the northern front up until the western front in Gujarat, which is Nalia, the border region in Gujarat that touches Pakistan along the international border. It has been conceded that there has been limited damage to personnel, Indian personnel, that has happened. This has happened particularly in Udhampur, in Pathankot, which Udhampur is in Jammu and Kashmir, Pathankot and Adhampur in Punjab, and Bhuj, which is in Gujarat. There is also information that was shared that, at 1:40 a.m. That's precisely the time that Pakistan once again resumed firing high caliber missiles, high caliber weapons, as well as drones. And unfortunately, Pakistan, in its cowardly attack, has struck medical care centers and a school. And these civilian infrastructure, this medical infrastructure has been struck in Srinagar, in Avantipur, and in Udhampur in Jammu and Kashmir. In retaliation, India has struck a number of air bases and ammunition depots of Pakistan, and there has been, in fact, if I could put out that information, the Pakistani military sites that have been struck, air bases that have been struck include Rafiki, Murid, Chaklala and Rahim Yar Khan. These all are in Rawalpindi, in Lahore, in Karachi, and yes, those are the regions in Gujranwala as well. So again, Pakistani artillery has been targeted in Kupwara, in Baramulla, Poonch, Rajouri, and Akhnur. So these are the regions where Pakistan continues to play on the offensive. Its military troops are moving forward in an offensive pattern, as has been seen in the last 2 days as well, last 2 nights in fact, and there has been counter strikes that have been, as the Ministry of External Affairs of India says, that have been measured, that have been responsible, and that have been calibrated. There have been, in fact, we have been showing our viewers for the last, in the intervening night, ever since 8 p.m. up until about, I don't know, its attack resumed at 1:40 a.m. on 10th of May, which is today, and it has continued up until 8 a.m., 9 a.m. There have been a number of these Indian missiles and Indian drones that have struck Pakistani air bases, Pakistani military stations, and India has been responsible, so to say, and again reiterated that only Pakistani military infrastructure and military installations have been struck. Civilian areas, civilian property are being spared by the Indian military. That's the roundup of the press conference that was held and the information that was dispensed.
Well, thank you very much, Megha, for all your insight, joining us from post that press conference. But we now move on with some more updates in regards to the developing situation. We have some international responses coming in, one being from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who, despite J.D. Vance's comments over the past 48 hours, the Secretary of State, in contrast to the Vice President, has offered US support to begin constructive talks between India and Pakistan, speaking to Islamabad's Army Chief Asim Munir on Friday as the neighbouring nations exchanged fire for the fourth day. I want to quickly read out the statement. Rubio continued to urge both parties to find ways to de-escalate and has also offered US assistance in starting constructive talks to avoid future conflicts. And that's come from the State Department spokesperson, Tammy Bruce. We're joined by Jim Rice, Professor of International Law, located in Vigan, the Philippines, to discuss this in more detail. Jim, thank you very much for joining us. We saw a statement from the Vice President, J.D. Vance, just a couple of days ago, calling this not America's war and vowed that they would not get involved. We've seen this. We've seen the Americans come back on this now, with Marco Rubio looking concerned about escalating tensions and offering the US's support in facilitating and mediating talks between the two South Asian nuclear-armed countries. What can you say about this? Marco Rubio's offer to help facilitate a peace deal between both India and Pakistan?
Well, I think that this shows a number of things, including the disarray that the Trump administration is in. On the one hand, J.D. Vance, who has been very destructive of the European alliance in the past, and has come out in support of the far-right AfD party in Germany, has basically said, as you correctly stated in your intro, that this has nothing to do with the United States. Well, on the other hand, Rubio has taken a more engaged position. I think that this is part of the ongoing chaos of the Trump administration. I would agree with the Rubio position. However, I believe that it is in everybody's interests to be engaged in this very significant international crisis. And I believe that a solution needs to be found, but it needs to be done on the right basis. It needs to be done in terms of the facts as we know them and on international law.
Thank you very much. We're also joined by Andrew K.P. Lung, independent China strategist located in Hong Kong. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. We have had a response from China as well, who have strongly urged India and Pakistan to avoid escalation. Can I first get your response of how quick of a pace this conflict seems to be escalating before we dive into China's perspective?
Well, of course, it has been escalating in the sense that, first of all, a number of Indian aircraft have been shot down. And then, of course, the Indian side also started more intensive bombardment against Pakistani forces. And both countries, of course, are nuclear armed. The last thing the region wants is a major conflict between these two major centers of power, not least along the border of China. And so it doesn't suit China's overall interest to have a major conflict along its borders. And it's also worsening the world economy, already rattled by these terrorist war on the whole world. And it doesn't suit American interests either, because President Trump wants to go down in history as a peace president. He doesn't want war over Ukraine. He doesn't want war in the Middle East so far as he could help it. And last of all, he doesn't want war between India and Pakistan. So as this threat is main agenda of making America great again by growing Americans' economy, by attracting more investments and jobs back to the United States, and by amassing more resources, be those resources are in Ukraine or in Greenland or other places. So it's to strengthen the national power of the United States, and also trying to address the twin deficits, the budget deficit and the fiscal deficit by perhaps lowering the US dollar, and by the tariffs trying to rebalance the world economy more in the favor of the United States. And the last thing President Trump wants is for his agenda to be undermined by an escalating war between two major nuclear powers in Asia. Of course, it's also focusing on containing China, but then the containment strategy is likely to be getting more complicated if there is an escalation between India and Pakistan, Pakistan being a very close ally for China. And so I think that that explains Americans' direct intervention in trying to mediate. And that mediation, of course, suits the interests of China and suits the interests of the world. And we hope that some sort of a deal, some sort of at least a temporary pause in the escalation would serve to promote a greater stability in the region.
Yes, Andrew, and I just want to further delve into where China's loyalties lie and how they may act if this conflict escalates. We've obviously had allegations of Chinese-made military equipment being used against India by Pakistan in the lead up to this conflict. And we've also had China responding in a diplomatic way. China initially asked for an independent probe along with Pakistan. China also has urged de-escalation like most other countries have. How will China navigate this conflict, seeing as it is bordering both countries?
Well, I think there is a lot of misunderstanding and misrepresentation of Beijing's stance on this. And the use of weapons is not here nor there, because the weapons come from the United States, come from Russia, come from China, from other European countries. It doesn't matter. It's just like a knife you can use to cut an apple, or you can use to stab someone. And then, of course, the fact that only maybe China's weapons are used doesn't mean that China is involved in it to the same extent that even those weapons are of American or Russian origin. It doesn't mean that United States or Russia are involved in this. So I think the reference to weapons is not here nor there. The most important thing is that it doesn't suit China's national interest to have a major conflict along its borders at a time when it's focusing on rebalancing its economy and in responding to the United States unilateral terrorist war. So I think that it suits China's interest to scale down the conflict. And in fact, the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the spokesman, has spoken at least maybe a few times, hoping that both sides to exercise self-restraint and both sides should talk to one another. And so I think that it needs a broker, a very powerful broker. Unfortunately, China is seen by India as a more biased side in favor of the Pakistanis. And I think that the United States is a very powerful country. Of course, it plays the fact that it suits Americans' interests. They have a peaceful, more, at least more stable region, so as to concentrate on the top priorities for the Trump administration. And so that suits the United States strategies much better, and hence Americans' involvement in trying to mediate this conflict and try to scale down the rhetoric. And of course, this suits China's interests as well.
Yes, and Jim Rice, I want to throw things back to you now and move things back to Rubio's statement. How does his approach align with the broader US foreign policy objectives in South Asia, particularly concerning counterterrorism and regional stability?
Well, again, the origins of this crisis that we're currently living through were an unprovoked terrorist attack by a terrorist organization coming from the territory of Pakistan. And in the initial response, which it took the Indian government about 2 weeks to consider the facts and to deal with the situation, they responded in a measured and clearly targeted way to attack terrorist training camps within Pakistan, which is undoubtedly within its rights under international law. And of course, then the response was from the Pakistan side to attack Indian military positions. And now, of course, the situation is escalating, as your previous guest has mentioned, in terms of Rubio's policy on South Asia. Again, I think it's too early in the administration to fully answer your question, Thomas. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jim. I just want to reiterate what's happening if you're just joining us. We've had a statement from US spokesperson Tammy Bruce, where he says that Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. Secretary Rubio emphasized that both sides need to identify methods to de-escalate and re-establish direct communication to avoid miscalculation. He further proposed US support in facilitating productive discussions to avert future disputes. Andrew, communication is a key issue in this conflict, in these tensions. We have misinformation being put forward by Pakistan. They're claiming the same that is happening from India. The US, obviously, they say they want direct communication between the two countries. It seems like we're rather far from that actually occurring. How would the US be able to facilitate this if they would be able to?
Well, of course, the United States is much more powerful militarily, and also in terms of its ability to exercise coercion through the US dollar and through sanctions and tariffs. And I think at a time when the Pakistan economy is also being rattled by the global disruptions over the global tariff war, when the economy is still struggling, a further threat of American sanctions could also move them closer to the table. And that kind of dynamics could also apply to the Indian side, while India is also entering into trade negotiations or tariff negotiations with the United States. So I think the United States is much more well-placed for this mediating role. And it suits, as I said, Americans' interest. Americans' priority is to attaining peace over Ukraine, peace in the Middle East, so that they can concentrate on Southeast, on the Asia Pacific. And the Asia Pacific side, it needs to have a relatively more stable environment, so as to focus on its contest with China, not that militarily, but also trying to bring Beijing to the table, so as to rebalance on trade, on technology, and also access to the Chinese market, and also inducing more Chinese investments in growing the manufacturing capacities in the United States, as the manufacturing sector is virtually being hollowed out over the years. So these are the top priorities for the United States. And I think that the United States, as I explained, have got a lot of levers under its disposal to broker at least a momentum towards de-escalation, if not an immediate settlement.
Yes, Jim Rice, I want to come back to you, as well as this United States statement that we've just had. We've had a collective statement that was released by the G7 countries this morning, the foreign ministers of the G7 countries. This includes Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. What role can these international actors play in facilitating de-escalation, and how receptive do you think both nations will be to external mediation, given the current state of the war, of lack of communication between both countries?
Well, as we've just learned from the press conference a few minutes ago, the events on the ground are happening very fast. And in that regard, I think that the G7 states really need to step forward and offer themselves as an opportunity for the two sides to de-escalate and to find an off-ramp for this present crisis. And so I would encourage this, and I think that the previous guest has actually made some good points with regard to economic levers, but I don't believe that it's in anyone's interest to punish India economically or in any other way for this current crisis.
Andrew, I want to come back to you and ask you something relatively similar. We've had a lot of international players come out and speak against and advocate for direct communication between the two countries. Given that this is a brewing and historical conflict, that this Pahalgam terror attack was the straw that broke the camel's back in regards to the tensions that have been building up to this point. How do you think both sides will be receptive to direct communication and an external mediator trying to facilitate a de-escalation?
I think both sides, both India and Pakistan, they of course be aware that of their own respective electorate, and the nationalism on both sides is very strong. And then a party in power, both in India and Pakistan, of course, they've got to look at what their electorate concern. As I said, as the nationalism is rising on both sides, and both sides see the other side as the instigator of this conflict, and both sides are doubling down on their responses, and that leads to the escalation. So I think it's not an easy task to really resolve this crisis at the drop of a hat. But I think that the pressure should be built, and also kind of mediation measures should be introduced by the G7, by the United States, and to a certain extent even by Beijing, provided it's believed by India to be an impartial player. But I think that what is happening now is not just terrorism has been highlighted. It's not the first time terrorism has happened. It happened before, and the most recent earth-shattering example, of course, is the September 11 kind of thing. And then all these acts of terrorism involve geopolitics, involve local politics, as well as much bigger questions for the whole world. I think that what is these recent major escalation between two powers, nuclear armed powers, highlights the vacuum in the world order, a vacuum which is supposed to be filled by the United Nations. And then what's the United Nations doing, for example? I mean, are they, and then of course the United Nations mechanism is totally out of date. I mean, the United Nations Security Council is a relic of the Second World War. But it doesn't mean that the current 5 members of the Security Council would easily give up their own particular influence there. And I wrote an article recently for the World Geostrategic Insights based in Rome, translated in a number of languages, suggesting perhaps it's now time to look at how the United Nations should be reformed and bringing into the emerging powers to what extent they can play, and also introduce a kind of mechanism which can promote dialogue between conflicting countries, or even better, before a crisis evolve into or explodes into a major regional conflict. There should be early opportunity for parties to talk to one another.
Andrew, I'm very sorry, we've got some breaking news coming in. Prime Minister Narendra Modi may once again hold a meeting with the 3 army chiefs today. This meeting is likely to take place at the Prime Minister's residence this evening. We're also joined by another guest, Shruti Das Gupta, who is a foreign affairs expert, joining us from New Delhi. Shruti, thank you for joining us. We've been discussing the reaction from both Marco Rubio, who has offered US assistance to facilitate de-escalation. We've also seen a statement from China hoping for the same thing, to de-escalate. And also we had a joint statement from the G7 this morning asking Pakistan and India to engage in direct dialogue. What I want to ask you, Shruti, is that is international mediation something that both India and Pakistan want? This is obviously a conflict that has been going on for decades and decades. Underlying tensions, the Pahalgam attack is used the analogy earlier, the straw that broke the camel's back. But do you think that international mediation is something both India and Pakistan both want, given the current state of the tensions and the conflict?
To answer your question, at the end of what I'm going to say this. Now listen to what I have to say, the chronology of what happened. Marco Rubio spoke to Pakistan, after which Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan called a national level meeting, which is the National Command Authority, which is the top decision-making body of the country's nuclear weapons. And then Marco Rubio again goes and speaks to India, asking it to de-escalate. So now you tell me whether any international mediation would be successful in kind of bringing the tensions down. Pakistan is not ready to listen to reason. It is looking for blood, and it's looking for blood in exchange for the blood spilt of terrorists, and we're saying this again and again. India, with its current military might, could have done much, much worse than what it has already done. It is only retaliating. Whichever point strikes us, we kind of negate that, we kind of neutralize that. We're not escalating. So international mediation is useless if Pakistan has cotton stuffed in its ears. And beyond that, the world community as a whole, G7, UN, everybody needs to put their money where their mouth is. Last night, at least last night from my time zone, they passed a $1.3 billion loan to Pakistan. We all know where this money is going. I know that this money comes with a lot of strings. The IMF kind of, the World Bank, the IMF, they kind of put a lot of strings on their loans that they give to Pakistan. They will not misuse this money. They'll just put a pin on it and put the money that they were supposed to take from their own economy and then funnel that into terrorism and attacking India. Nobody else pays the price for what the world is doing except Indians, innocent Indians. On top of that, I want to bring to your notice, right after Pahalgam, there was a minister from Pakistani side. He came on media and said that if India has struck 9 sites with 24 missiles, at least 48 must go through and hit Indian sites. He advised the media that Pakistan wants to attack the temples and the dams. That means infrastructure. Temples and dams are infrastructure and civilian sites. And you have seen every night since then, every night since Operation Sindoor, they have attacked one Gurudwara. Last night, they attacked a temple in Jammu. So they are doing exactly what they're saying. It's just that the world is too deaf to hear what they're saying. They're not able to understand. They believe the victim card that the Pakistan uses. It is keeping its people poor. It is keeping the Baluchis poor. It's keeping the Pashtuns poor. It's keeping the Sindhs poor. The only one proliferating from all of this is the Punjabi Pakistan side, which is the entire army and its preferred terror group. So I'm really not in the mood to hope that any kind of international mediation is going to come into effect until unless Pakistan is brought down to its knees. And it is not going to be done that until unless either India decides that it's had enough and it takes it off the map, or the world decides that it has had enough and cuts off all sources of money that is going to buy these guns, these weapons that are fired against India. Back to you.
Shruti Dasgupta, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to our guests, Andrew Pilung and Jim Rice as well, for joining us. That's all we have time for, but we will bring you all developing news from the ongoing situation.